RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello, everyone. I am your co-host, Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 15,000 plus revenue operators from all across the globe. And today on the RevOps AF podcast, we are talking to Niel Hildebrand, who is a former VP of revenue operations at companies like ClickUp. He also was in RevOps, I guess, before it was RevOps. If you can believe it or not, way back in 2012, there was this little company called Box. Niel was an early team member there on the marketing operations side. And so he knows a whole lot about revenue operations, how it has evolved, especially over the last decade. And today with Niel, we're actually be talking a lot about the tension that exists between the different revenue functions or teams, marketing, sales, success, which are typically supported by revenue operations. And so Niel's going to draw on a whole heck of a lot of great experience for that. But Niel, first I'll turn it over to you and maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and then your professional journey as well, because I know there's a lot there that I didn't cover.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I think you covered the professional part. It's helpful to understand the origin of RevOps and how and why it came to be, because I think that helps us understand where we are today and how to make the best decisions and know where the industry is going. So I was early at even marketing ops. When I joined Box, wasn't even called marketing ops. I was reading Serious Decisions articles and explaining to Box, people at Box, what SQLs were and MQLs and all that back in that, if you can think of that far back. And then really had the early notions of what RevOps really could be. I didn't know what to call it at the time, but I saw that there was this fundamental that having locally optimized operations roll up into the individual leaders, into the marketing leader and sales leader, wasn't really like the divine way that it should happen, that it was because of circumstance, but really the best way is to have this cohesive operations function that we all know and love, now called RevOps. And to me, it all came about with data, right? It was a bunch of data arms races between the functions, and everyone was arguing over whose data is right. And my thought process was, if we can create a common data layer across the functions, if you can have that sit on a systems that's not only helping to automate process, but also creating the data object model, you're going to use to run the business. And then there was a centralized function that could help with the kind of joins between the functions that will then help us create kind of revenue more cleanly. And so, I've been on that journey since leaving AppDynamics to make that happen at a bunch of different companies, a bunch of different business models. And, really I'm seeing a lot of patterns there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So within revenue operations, maybe first question before we start to dive in on maybe where some tension can exist. You've seen, like you said, you were at Box in marketing operations before it was called marketing operations. You've been in business operations at AppDynamics. You've led RevOps at a variety of companies, most recently ClickUp, which has gone through a humongous amount of growth and scale. So how has RevOps looked at those companies? What roles, what teams did it support? What did RevOps mean at those companies where you were at?
Yeah, I like that. No matter what the company size, I like to think of kind of the end state. And then even when I was the first person in at a company, me and 4 reps, I still had that in mind as I brought team members in and had them think about the whole multiple hats they're wearing. And so the functions generally are aligned around this idea of strategy, analytics, process, and systems. And those are the general categories of RevOps. So the teams tend to be aligned around those things because the goal is to get those things to work together. And so I ClickUp, for example, I had a strategy and execution team that was there just to help with annual planning, interfacing with finance, helping to run the kind of pipeline council that helped the join between sales and marketing. Basically anything that has to do with either interfacing with G&A and APD or helping to work cross-functional. And then there was a field ops team that was more like your traditional sales ops, dealing with the territories and the like, aligned with sales leaders. There's an analytics team that was responsible for creating the data layer, creating the data marks, creating the insights for federating self-serve data, as well as doing deep dives, creating our forecasting model that can then be used for data-driven forecasts. There was a systems team, and I break that up into, I think about that like engineering. So I break that up into kind of the BSAs and the admins, but also then there was a separate kind of products team. Struggled with what they called that for the longest time, but I called it PSA just because it sounds like BSA. Yeah. but a product team that was intended to treat the business as their market and then understand and then feed in then what the development team should be doing or and admins. So there was kind of the two sides of the systems, and then there was the kind of the guts and the mechanics of all the deal mechanics. So like order ops, deal desk, commissions, teams that are responsible just for pulling the deal flow through.
Yeah. And so lots of moving parts in all of that, and then plenty of different stakeholders that you all are supporting from, I guess let's first talk about the different revenue generating functions from marketing to sales to customer success and support. So I think it's easy for us to maybe default or think about going into a company or a place like that and saying, okay, like we need to get everybody on the same page. We need to eliminate the tension that exists between these teams. Like we all need to be working together. We're all friends. Like let's all get into a drum circle and sing Kumbaya. But that's not at least the way that you approach things and the way that you look.
Right.
And so there's this whole notion of the tension that does, I won't even say can exist, that does exist. I think probably at every company between those different teams, marketing, sales, customer success. So why, when someone in RevOps is looking at supporting those different stakeholders, why should they be viewing this as, hey, my job is not to eliminate the tension that's there, but it is to actually balance the tension that exists?
Yeah, and each function exists for a reason across that revenue spectrum, right? You're trying to articulate the value, sell the value, and then create the value, right, across. And each function has their part in doing and to play in that. Because they each have different motivations, naturally they're going to come to different conclusions with regards to how things should happen, like running a deal cycle. So for example, if you take professional services or your quick start type team, and then you take your sales team, naturally the people who are going to be responsible for installing the product after the sale happens are going to want to get in earlier to the cycle, especially if it's a large install. So I was at Instabase and we were at a 3 to 6 month install. It was a pretty heavy product. So they wanted to get in as early as possible, making sure they're promising the right thing, make sure it was being scoped out in the right way. SOWs are being established that fit the scope of work they were going to do. And then they had their own P&L to run to make sure they had the headcount to happen. And then they were marching towards success after the sale. But so they wanted to push as early in the sales process as possible to ask those questions. Salespeople, of course, want them out of the room because they want to be able to promise the work, and they want to be able to reduce the amount of stakeholders involved in that conversation because they're trying to get to a deal that itself might be tenuous. And so you have this natural tension between those two teams where one wants to pull earlier, one wants to pull later. And who's responsible for resolving that tension? In the old model, you'd have these two ops teams and they would be serving their leaders and they would be at odds with each other. But RevOps, as the modern way to think about it, should be the one that looks at the system as a whole and can understand the trade-offs involved with pulling the PS person earlier to get in that SOW done, and when that should happen, how you mark success with that. And same thing can be applied pre-sale as the same example, right? Where marketing and sales very classically have this tension with regards to what the right lead is and how you tread over accounts, and are SDRs supposed to invite people to webinars or they're not supposed to invite people, and who gets credit and all this credit madness that's out there. And then when the baton handoff happens, right? I always think about it like a race, and there's a moment where they're both handing the baton, and then there's a moment when it lets go, and when is that moment, right? And naturally, I sat on the marketing side for years, for 7 years across two companies, where I was advocating for the marketing perspective. And it wasn't until I was able to then pull myself out of that I realized that I was really arguing for one thing that probably wasn't good for the whole system. And similarly, there's no one on the sales side that really can understand that side of the house. So having an arbiter of that conversation from a process and a strategy point of view helps to make sure that and everyone's going to walk away feeling like they maybe lost a little bit because they didn't get fully what they wanted. But we and RevOps can see above the fold and know from a corporate perspective, it's going to provide the cleanest customer experience, use of resources, and the path to revenue.
Yeah, makes sense. And you said if you think about kind of revenue operations, at least in the short to medium term, like by definition means that it's a zero-sum game, right? Like you have a limited amount of attention resources that you can deploy, and you are now responsible for driving revenue effectively and efficiently across marketing, sales, and customer success, for example. So naturally, like you're the one who's making decisions around like those trade-offs, those priorities. So doing one thing means like you can't do another
Hmm.
thing, right? You can't just do both of them or do all of them at the same time and do all of them well. And so how actually like I think, I mentioned we've got 15,000 people in the RevOps co-op community. We actually have done this series of what we call like executive think tanks recently, where we've gotten some leaders together in various cities, and this notion of alignment and this tension in making these trade-offs, right? Like this is a big problem or challenge that people face. So if you're a revenue operator and you're sitting in this sort of environment where maybe you have a lot of unhealthy tension that isn't balanced correctly within your company, or maybe you're only responsible for a slice and you're trying to get ownership over more. What do you recommend those people do? What are some ways that people can maybe start to appropriately balance the tension across, again, marketing, sales, and customer success so that they can do things in the right way?
Yeah, I think it manifests itself differently depending on the altitude. And so I think the ultimate way that all gets unblocked is through the proper kind of frameworks and through kind of leadership providing the right alignment. Because if the best kind of operating principle that can be established in a company like takes into account the relative motivations of marketing and sales in the right way, and the leaders should be the ones that can have that company hat and understand like where they can do the trade-offs. And if that's happening, everything else tends to flow from that. But of course, I tend to enter situations where that's not happening and it's absolute
Yeah.
chaos. And you can see it. You can see it manifest in a lot of symptomatic ways. A lot of the thrash happening on that IC level, the mid IC level, the lower IC level, with regards to the work they're happening and how they're prioritizing work and how they're accepting. I find a lot of RevOps team have a hard time saying no. And so then they just do everything, and doing everything feels like you're serving a customer best. But actually, it turns out like you don't serve your customer best because you're spreading yourself too thin or working
Yeah.
on the right things. And so organizations that I think almost at any level, having clarity with regards to the work you're doing, having that aligned to a clean kind of OKR or V2MOM, whatever framework you're going to use, and be clear about the important, what you're working on this quarter, next quarter, that's important, how that ladders into the overall company success. If you don't have that, it is going to just be chaos, and all that tension is going to be spewed everywhere. If you
Yeah.
can, with your sphere, be clear about what you're working on, what the big rocks are, what the pebbles and sand are, and use that as a way to go and push and ask questions about, should I be working on this? Should I be working on that? Is this really important to the overall world? And am I comfortable saying no to this? Because somebody in the business is going to scream at me because I don't get this thing done, whether it's systems or an analytics project or some process thing. If if you can go and feel comfortable saying no to somebody and know that they're not gonna have the greatest response because there's that tension. That is what tension is gonna,
Yeah.
that's how it manifests. But know that you have the air cover of your leader and they have the air cover of their leader, and we're all working on the right thing together. That's really then how it all gets resolved, because the tension's not going to go away. You're still going to have some AE that's bemoaning the fact that you didn't help assign this territory to them in the way they wanted, or you're going to have some marketing person be frustrated because you didn't do the analysis that they were expecting you to do, and instead you did some other analysis. But if you're categorizing it the right way and you're able to prioritize it yourself, and then you're able to get your leader to help with our prioritization, and that happens within the whole team and the whole system, that's then how the tension then again isn't alleviated. You're still going to have the people that are frustrated because their thing isn't the top, but it gives you a mechanism to go and have that dialogue and explain that. And again, so I've found in my history, some people don't understand that, and that's just to me the way. Well, there's recreational outrage is a real thing. People are just going to be mad first because they want to be mad about stuff, and you can't stop that. But the rational people, the good people, the high performers, and the leaders, they'll get it, because there's at least a way for you to explain why you're saying no to something, and then that balances the tension the best way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing you mentioned is tying things back to company level goals or objectives. And again, like not all companies are created equal, nor do they have the same goal setting like frameworks or maturity in place. But you mentioned like OKRs, MBOs, like a lot of companies have a formal goal setting process. And so when you get requests or need to be focused on making some of these trade-offs, that's a really good way to like the first thing to either ask yourself, or I've actually seen this work where like ask the other person, be like, okay, you're asking for XYZ. What OKR is this going to help us
Mhm.
achieve or like execute on right? So like ask yourself that, but also ask the other person that, because then it's also not you saying, no, we can't do that because it doesn't align to an OKR. It's I'm asking you the question so that you can basically answer it yourself. And I've actually seen that work really well, is like starting to just incorporate the other person in the decision making like process there. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're going to eliminate the tension or frustration that they might have with still not getting their thing done that they want, but you've now brought them along for the ride. And so the results will be better.
Yeah, spot on. I love that. Bring them into the problem space with you, and not everyone's going to be able to do that in a professional way, or do that and be
Yeah.
there with. And I think that's its own signal, right? You can understand that person's going to be irrational no matter what. You can never actually give them a good answer unless you just devote your time to them, which is going to be not right. But good people will understand it, and they'll understand the why in the right problem space, I found, no matter what the stage.
Yeah. All right. So I want to talk about a couple of, and I don't know, I think there's truth to these. Also, there's like stereotypes to these, but I want to talk about a couple of areas where there's perceived and existing tension and how revenue operators can best approach this. So first, let's talk about the one that probably comes to everyone's mind: marketing versus sales, right? Marketing is like, hey, I'm producing all these quality leads and I'm handing them all off to sales and they don't do anything with them. And sales is, I would always be able to hit my number if I just got better leads from marketing, if I got more leads and more pipeline from marketing, right? Like we've all heard these like kind of classic battles, right? So how should revenue operators approach, I think, like you said, that tension, right, that exists between those two teams, two departments? What are some common things that you've seen in the past, and then how have you solved for those as well?
Yeah, I don't think it's a tale that's ever going to end. It's going to
Yeah.
be a tale of the time and a tale as old as the future. I have a box that the way we solved that was through managing towards capacity. So we had a team of 20 SDRs that were just focused on inbound, and another team of 18 outbound reps at the time. So those 20 inbound reps were then fed leads from the marketing team. And so there was a certain capacity we knew that team had, because they were high in the short run, they were hired to that capacity. And then so it was about how to give them the right distribution. And we were we're lucky to get in early with a lead scoring kind of firm at the time that kind of gave us a data-driven way to understand we were giving the best leads possible. And then that kind of we're able to show with data that if the A's were better than B's were better than C's. So that's now been, I don't want to say it's a solved problem, but it's a known space now. Back then that was
Yeah.
innovative. But really, that doesn't solve the problem, right? Because managing towards capacity is a short run solve, but the long run solve is what should your optimal capacity even be, right? How many SDR should you have? And that's the conversation. That's the deeper conversation of finance. So I think, like to some degree, I think if you think about the maturity spectrum for a RevOps team, the less mature will focus on that symptomatic problem of how to solve the lead flow. The actually more mature view is just how many SDR should we be even having? How many leads should we be having? Working backwards from revenue and having a thesis-driven approach with regards to how we expect that pipeline to be generated, and then using that to get everyone on board. Like before we're in the heat of battle with regards to this lead sucks, this lead's great. Like get everyone on board in the theoretical and planning process. So I think planning helps to solve to some degree, because you have a thesis with regards to conversion rates, you have a thesis with regards to amount of volume and the number of actors involved. And then you're going to have, I think, you're going to have the natural battles within marketing. We talk about marketing as if this monolithic thing. The reality is zero sum game within themselves, right? There's the events team and the digital team and the demand gen team, and they're all actually fighting for the same budget. So they're not frenemies with each other as much as we don't want to admit that. And it is a zero sum game amongst them. And so I think a lot of this tension actually arises, in my experience back in my marketing ops days, from them all wanting to gain credit from each other, let alone their marketing wanting to gain credit from sales. And the reality is we're all trying to do one thing, which is generate pipeline. So I found if you can get a clean work back plan to understand a clean definition of what that baton handoff point is, a clean definition of what we're expecting as a team, regardless of whether it's marketing or sales, to generate in terms of that pipeline, the VOs in my parlance in my past lives, then all of those little battles around, is it the right leads? Are you sending too much? Are you not sending too much? Those can be managed. You can manage towards that number from a leadership perspective. Sometimes though, like the answer is even deeper. I was at one company where I reviewed all that data and I reviewed even the team, and I came to the conclusion that the SDR team just shouldn't exist. They had hired a team and they kind of did it because other companies do it. But when you take a step back and look at it, they didn't need to have a team that was just focusing on trying to outbound to the accounts. They didn't really have the right messaging. They didn't have the right the engagement from the customers. They didn't have the right education journey in the first place. They were trying to pull customers through. So the SDR team was just sending this message of hey, let's meet. And so we actually went the other extreme and just got rid of the SDR team and made it fully marketing first and a full education journey. Sometimes I think RevOps roles is also to not look at the problem and be able to actually view it from arm's length and understand that maybe we're asking the wrong questions and the whole thing needs to be questioned and kind of changed. So I think don't get caught up in those little micro battles. Sometimes you need to be able to view it deeper. And that's I think ultimately what true RevOps' role is to be able to ask those questions of the org.
Yeah. And what about, I guess, one specific example, and then I'll move on to another one. But at least for marketing and sales, like sales typically looks at things in terms of accounts and opportunities. And those are not obviously the things that marketing cares about. Marketing looks at things like leads and contacts. So is it okay that those two things are different and different teams are focused on the different things? And is the job of RevOps then to be, I don't know, the translator, right, between those? Or should you actually try to get people on the same page and say, hey, marketing, actually, instead of leads and contacts, like we care about like marketing qualified accounts. And that way, like everyone's marching towards the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I had that similar epiphany back in my App Dynamics days where I was literally in the middle of a conversation with their sales and marketing, and I could tell they were actually just talking past each other because they were arguing for optimizing completely different things. And so one's arguing the sky's blue and the other arguing that the ocean's wet. And you're like, you guys aren't even arguing the same on the same plane, so you're never going to get to a conclusion. And it was because of that object-oriented difference. And to me, the clear answer is what you said. I think opportunities and accounts are the center of mass. If we're selling to B2B, we're selling to businesses, not, yeah, I know there's people in those businesses that are making decisions, but ultimately we're trying to get those companies to buy from us. And so the marketing should take the collective of people that are happening or the people that are responding to their campaigns, but ultimately you're trying to get an account heated up so that a salesperson could then go and engage with account. And they might not even engage with the same person that was heated up. That's the thought exercise I put teams to when I ask them is, if you have these 5 people over here go and engage and they're heavily engaged and you're a salesperson, and I'm asking a marketing person this, do you feel like you have to go and talk to one of those 5 people, or could you go and talk to someone else completely different and reference those 5 people and know that internally they may talk to each other? And the answer, I think, a true marketing person viewing from the sales lens will realize, oh yeah, like you may not have to talk to these 5 people. You might talk to the CMO because the entire marketing team is talking to you. And so you need to break that mold of and I think the reason we got here is because we got so wrapped around the axle around data. It's so easy to know that Matt went and filled out this form and he went and did this. We have all this data around what Matt did. And so it's so easy to draw this thread through what Matt's doing in this account. But it's harder to go and look at the true complexity of actually happening, where Matt and his 5 colleagues are doing things together and they're all individually or together doing research. And so it's harder to do the account. It was harder. I think nowadays there's a lot more tools and a lot more focus around that account-based view that can bring those teams together.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. So outside of marketing and sales, another area of, I think, tension, which I don't know, may not naturally maybe pop into people's heads, is actually between sales and finance, and specifically around annual planning, right? Like typically people are handed out a number, right? It's we got to grow by X, right? And then you're like, okay, how do we do that? Right here, Neil, like you got to get me this, right? And a lot of this, again, we're doing this around planning. Finance, again, managing the entire P&L, looking at overall cost, OpEx, how they can drive the best ROI, keep costs low. Sales obviously wanting to deliver a number. So what's the best way? Like what role should RevOps play in that scenario?
Yeah, and I've seen that at multiple altitudes. I started the annual planning process, or really started the kind of go-to-market driver in the annual planning process at App Dynamics with great success, so that it wasn't just a financial plan. There's also an operating plan and strategic plan associated with that. And I've also done that at earlier stage companies where there's actually more uncertainty with regards to how the future is going to happen. And just as you said, the incentives are misaligned. Finance wants to have the least amount of expenses possible and then the highest quota as possible, because then they get, in theory, the best kind of financial outcomes. Sales looks at it and says, yeah, if I actually need more resources than you're giving me, and I can't get the quota you're expecting me to get. And so I think RevOps is in the best position to play neutral. I know that sounds weird because it sounds like RevOps should be the advocate of the sales side and the go-to-market side. At least the position I've taken is I can view the go-to-market side very clear-eyed because I'm already neutral from sales specifically because I'm looking across marketing and CS. And finance, I tend to get along super well with finance because they're data-driven. I'm data-driven. They're spreadsheet-oriented. I can do spreadsheets, right? And so I can talk to both sides and really understand, at least be an arbiter to understand where and why they're talking past each other, to be able to gut check what finance is thinking. Because I think unchecked finance goes and makes wild assumptions about what conversion rates growth is going to be. I've seen them go and say, oh, you converted at 14% this year, so you're going to convert at 20% next year. It's only 5% more. And you're like, dude, that is nearly
Double. Yeah, you're asking me to like double my effectiveness.
Yeah. And like that's the key lever that you're expecting in terms of getting this efficiency that it's going. There's no way that's going to happen. And at the same time on the sales side, you're like, okay, let's be realistic about like where we're going, what our TAM is, where our growth is, how much kind of dry pipeline we have that we're ready to go in the second half, and how much kind of ramp rep are going to come online. Like we actually can be okay with signing up for this number, and it's not going to be the end of the world. You're going to be able to hit this number because of the way that your ramp expected assumptions are, your overassignment assumptions are, and your quota, which are the three main drivers. So I think RevOps is in a great position to help arbitrate those. And the reality is there's a bound, and then there's going to be somewhere in the middle, and it's a negotiation. And sales loves negotiating. Finance loves it too, because they get involved with a lot of vendor negotiations. Yeah. And RevOps can help not only arbitrate that conversation, but if they're, kind of extra credit, bonus time, if you can align that back to the strategic lens, if you can go and say, the reason the bets we're going to take this coming year on new product launch, new markets, market growth. Hey, we saw that EMEA wasn't performing as well this year, and we think they actually can perform well next year. Not just because America performed better, but specifically because we're going to launch these types of programs. We're going to make these investments in marketing, and RevOps can help actually kind of bring detail to that discussion so that we can get to an outcome that both sides feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I like that. And it makes a lot of sense. Arbiter, more like in the middle instead of advocating for either side. I think that's a really good position for RevOps to be in, because again, you want to do what's best for the business to drive revenue efficiently and effectively, not just to drive whatever revenue possible, but do it in an effective and efficient way. And so one last kind of area of tension that I want to ask you about is actually between RevOps and sales around territories. So naturally, or I guess typically, RevOps is the one who is carving out or creating territory assignments, or what makes the most sense for the business in terms of how they should dish out territories and accounts. And a lot of times that influences then like quota and like numbers that you expect people to hit. And a lot of, I think, initial reaction for all of us is more is better, but I guess may not always be the case, or may not be the case at all. So how should, I guess, RevOps be thinking about the tension that will naturally exist when they start to dish out territories, knowing that, again, there's no way you're going to be able to make everyone happy. People aren't going to be, at least one person will not be satisfied. But how can you balance the dissatisfaction, right, that is ultimately going to be there?
Yeah. And we've covered tension across go-to-market functions. We've covered tension between go-to-market and G&A. And then we can't lose sight of the fact that there's tension within the functions. As you talked about with marketing earlier, marketing is not a monolith. They have their own, demand gen has even their own teams within it, and so does product marketing, et cetera. And sales the same way, right? Sales has their own internal tension across geos, across segments, or what have you. And so part of what RevOps needs to do is manage intra-functional tension. Territories is a prime example of that, because it hits, when you're managing intra-functional tension, sometimes it pits RevOps against the function. So the tension actually becomes between RevOps and people within the functions themselves. And that's sometimes a hard one to deal with, because it's easy to succumb, but then de-optimize. Whereas when you're dealing with two third parties, it's easier to hold the tension. So with territories, the reality is, in a perfect world, you actually want to assign accounts a little bit to each of the reps, because there's always this balance of, is there a market? Are these accounts actually accounts we can go after? Are we treaded over this ground before? Do we have our data wrong in the systems? There's so many variables to knowing whether kind of the territories are being balanced or being given the right weighting. And what you ideally like to do is provide a little bit less accounts than reps need, because that would give them that they would focus more energy into those accounts. Because they knew if you naturally give them 20, but you only gave them 15, if they knew those were the only 15 they were going to get, you better believe they're not going to go and just AI spam bot all these accounts and waste and blast through the 15. Although I've seen that, and then they go and ask for more, and then that's part of the tension, right? Like,
Yeah.
Then I'm sorry that you went and spammed all your account and ruined your shots. And they should expect each of those shots to be super important in regards to their communication at one of those accounts. But if you do that, if you give them 15 instead of 20, of course you have everyone kicking and moaning, right? Everyone's going to be complaining that they don't have enough. Oh, these accounts are great. Hey, can we go? I've had this exact war at multiple companies. Oh, can we go into oil and gas now? I know we're not selling to them today, but like I know someone at Shell. I know if we contacted them for our product, it would be great. And to hold your ground and say, no, we're not selling to oil and gas today. We don't have the content for it. It's a different type of sale, and we don't need to experiment with that. We need to be selling the financial services first and getting that right before we move on. Now pits you against the team. And one analogy that kind of hit me a couple of years ago was like, it was wine related. Like, actually, it turns out the secret to make a good wine is you underwater them a little bit, and then the plant puts more energy into giving all that reserve of water to the grapes, and then you make better wine grapes. And it's the same thing with reps. And so the way you balance that tension is you need to have kind of a clear-eyed discussion with the leadership, right? Leadership, I think the best analogy on territories I've heard from one of my leaders was that the leader owns the account, they're leasing them out to the people in the teams. And so the individual owners like the AEs can't think that they own those accounts, they're just borrowing them. And they better be a good steward of those accounts, otherwise they could lose them at any time. And so ultimately, it's better to have a clean conversation with the leadership and have them understand. And turns out not all leaders actually can see that clear. And I find, fortunately or unfortunately, that RDs they advocate more for the reps than for leadership. And so they tend to think, I'm not being given enough accounts as well. The higher up you get, the more accounts they have, the more they can be like, I'm sure it'll work out. I'll find an account here that'll make my patch. And I have these great reps, they'll make it work out. And so you actually need to go up high enough in the chain. You can't get whiplash by the AE for sure. You also can get whiplash by the RD. I'm just using a typical structure.
Yeah.
And so you have to be going up high enough to be able to be clear-eyed about the fact that we are going to hold the line and be resolved and not just bend the will of reps kind of needing more, and know that you're going to have some chirping from the field. And again, this comes back to building relationship with leaders and having them be able to understand how that company hat and understand where and how to hold the line. And it's an unsolvable. You have to know in RevOps at the end of the day, what I found happens in not functioning RevOps teams is they don't feel comfortable with that tension being held. They don't feel comfortable with knowing that there's people out there that maybe dislike them or maybe talking to their leaders bad about them because they want to hold this good relationship. And so then what they do, they oversign. They say, okay, I'm going to give you 25. And then now everything's inefficient because the RevOps person feels bad about holding tension. They'll give other people tension, but they don't want to involve with it. So you got to eat what you serve and also be able to be okay with having that tension. And the way to do that is to have great relationships with your leaders and all be on the same page about what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And you're never, like you said, tension will always exist somewhere. And again, the whole point of our chat today is about balancing that tension. So even if, like you said, you cave and you give in to that request to go from 20 to 25, you may eliminate the tension in that particular scenario, but you're just kicking the can down the road. Like, it's going to pop up where then someone asks the question of like, why weren't we as effective, or why did we blow through these accounts? And now you can only go so far before you need to face it. So don't shy away from it. Run head first at it, embrace it, give it a hug, and focus on balancing that for things that are best for the company.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. So I have two more quick questions for you that are not RevOps or work related. So my first one is, outside of revenue operations, work, professional time, right? You close a laptop and say you're done for the day. What can folks find you doing? What are you passionate about outside of kind of work and revenue operations in your professional life?
My latest hobby is learning electronic music production. Played music in high school, saxophone. I was in jazz band. Taught myself guitar in college, and then learned to DJ 4 years ago. I feel like everyone's a DJ these days. And then now,
Nice.
you know, being electronic music production, which is, I think it tickles, funny enough, the same brain a little bit as RevOps because there's so many different elements to it. You can get deep into sound design, shaping sound. You get deep into mixing and mastering. You can do rhythm and you can do melody, or you can just dawdle around and not have to care about any of those elements. And so you can go deep and multiple different types of areas. And to make a truly good track, you have to actually be able to be good at a bunch of disparate areas. And being good at sound design, not the same thing as creating rhythm. It's very similar to RevOps in a lot of ways. There's a lot of disparate things you have to be good at, from systems and analytics or whatever, to be good at RevOps. Not to like sound so geeky about it, but I think it tickles the same kind of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that. Well, that plays nicely actually into my next question. So we have RevOpsAF, our conference, which next year we're hosting an event in the US and an event in Europe. Our US conference, RevOpsAF, will be in New Orleans in May of 2025, and we'll have 300 to 350 RevOps folks there. We're hosting a smaller version of 100 to 150 people in Berlin in June of next year. But let's, to set the stage for this question, we'll use the US event as an example. So you're at RevOpsAF in New Orleans. You're going to be a speaker. You've got 350 people in the audience. We call your name to come up on the main stage. Everyone starts cheering, roaring. The crowd's going nuts. They're super excited to hear you speak. You're entering stage left. What is the walk-on song or music that you're playing as you come up on stage?
I've thought about this a lot. I'm a baseball fan, and I always thought about what my closer song would be if I came in. I think it'd be "Everything in Its Right Place" by Radiohead. It's like a good bass.
Nice. That's awesome. I love that. I could tell once I got to that part of the question, you're like, I got this. Like I've
thought about this one before.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then I guess maybe my last question is, you cheering for the Dodgers or the Yankees, or neither right now?
Neither. I'm a Giants fan.
Yeah, I'm a Brewers fan, and yeah, first round, one and done for us for how many years now? Yeah. All right. Well, Niel, thank you very much, my friend, for talking about everything from, again, RevOps and tension and how to balance that tension, to baseball, to Radiohead and sound design and everything in between. It was great to chat. I really appreciate it. That's all I got for you, my friend. So I'll let you run, but thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Keep it RevOpsAF.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.